Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach, and I welcome the opportunity to discuss this issue and for the Minister for making himself available to respond to it. Cathaoirleach, I'm aware of in the region 200 farms in South West Offaly, not to mention more, as alluded to in this debate relating to East Galway and indeed into Westmeath, that are underwater since July. And it's not that this is a once in a few years occurrence, it is an annual one at this juncture, unfortunately. And it's not that these lands in the main, of course, are designated, some of them as SAC, Special Areas of Conservation. Restricted agricultural practices in the best weather and circumstances would prevail ordinarily. But unfortunately, as alluded to earlier and as evidenced only last week and again last year, this is something that is not being resolved through minimalist clearance of pinch points on the Shannon, as evidenced by minor works to date in recent years. It's not something that apparently can be resolved with the situation that you have presently, where the interests in relation to water levels are contradictory ones between OPW, between ESB, local authorities, Waterways Ireland, amongst others. It would be resolved, of course, if there was agreement between all these parties, if there was an agency that brought all these together, if there was agreement with local farming communities and organisations to maintain levels at one which meets the requirements of all concerned, and if gates were adhered to and the levels associated with gates such as Meelick were adjusted with agreement with those parties, particularly those whom are dependent on these lands for their agricultural practice, for their livelihoods, in order to be in a position to maintain the standards of living that one would expect with such lands being available to them. So, it may well be that there's an unspoken practice within OPW that hasn't been alluded to in public, and that being that it is appropriate for these lands to be flooded to safeguard other areas along the path of the Shannon towards the sea and towards Ardnacrush and so forth. And that, if that is the case, I think it's something that should be stated openly. It's something that should be brought to the attention of those that are affected by it, and there should be discussions around adequate compensation and appropriate compensation to deal with the offshoot of that on those 200 farms that I refer to, because there are even more than that affected by this, and it is something that I know other representatives in the area have been in touch with the various departments and with the Minister's department to move towards a resolution for once and for all, because, as I said, there is, as it stands, without any such flooding, huge restrictions in relation to farming practice by virtue of the SAC designation, which is one that all those associated with those farms are prepared to work within the confines of the regulations associated with that status, but cannot do so by virtue of this ongoing flooding matter. And it's not as if the weather has been that detrimental to cause this. So it is an issue around the maintenance, the management and the delivery of adequate resources within the Shannon to meet the demands of all those bodies that I've referred to. But those that suffer most and those that suffer regularly appear to be those constituents whom have been in touch with me. Those are those farmers, those families in South West Offaly, in East Galway and in parts of Westmeath. And I would ask the Minister to respond to the various requests that have been made by me and others and other bodies associated with those farmers, with a view to meeting, with a view to resolving this issue, and with a view to being upfront and straight in relation to the efforts and deliberations of the OPW, and if they do include, as I said earlier, an unspoken action which appears to be one which allows these lands predominantly to be flooded to such an extent that farming practice, as restricted as it is, as I said earlier, by SSEs, is not now possible whatsoever.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach, and I want to start by thanking Deputy Cowen for raising this important matter. At this time of the year, as we approach the winter season, it is opportune that we consider our preparedness as a country to respond to severe weather events such as flooding. I am acutely aware of the impact that the recent flooding has had on individual householders and communities at large across the country, not only in the Midlands, but specifically in the Midlands for this debate. Since taking up my current position as Minister for the OPW, I visited a number of areas affected by the recent storms and witnessed damage caused and spoken with people and businesses owners directly that have been affected in Kinmare, in Kilmallock, Skibbereen, Bandon, Bantry, Clifton and elsewhere. And I want at the outset, Chairman, and I'm sure the deputies will agree, to compliment and thank the staff of the Office of the Public Works and the local authorities, the emergency services and volunteers who have assisted over the August storms in all of those communities that have been affected, including the Midlands. The Government's framework for major emergency management underpins coordination of responses to all emergencies in Ireland, including flooding. Through the framework, the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government is the lead department with national responsibility for coordinating the response to severe weather emergencies, including flooding. Local authorities are designated as the lead agency for response to flooding events within their administrative areas and for ensuring that effective arrangements can be put in place and to respond to public service weather warnings issued by Met Éireann. I want to recognise the proactive planning of the local authorities in putting in place temporary flood defences and putting response staff on standby in preparation for those recent weather events, including those in the Midlands. Their planning and rapid response to flood events help to mitigate the damage and devastation that has been caused. Each local area has its own individual plan in the event of a flooding event, and Garda Síochána, the Civil Defence and the HSE are all involved, and I want to acknowledge their work also. In relation to planning to mitigate the flood damage in the future, on the 3rd of May 2018, the Office of Public Works launched the 29 flood risk management plans and €1 billion investment in flood risk over the coming decade. These plans are output from the Catchment Flood Risk Assessment and Management programme, commonly known as CFRAM, the largest ever flood risk study carried out in the state. The plan set out measures proposed to address the flood risk nationally and include 119 schemes to protect towns, villages and cities nationally. Procurement of 60 of the 119 relief schemes is now progressing and in some cases complete. These schemes will be, together with the 46 already complete, mean that 95% of the at-risk properties will be protected by the flood risk scheme. In addition, the OPW is coordinating Ireland's whole-of-government approach to flood risk management across three strategic policy areas: prevention, protection and preparedness. The Interdepartmental Flood Policy Coordination Group was established for the purpose of examining the potential non-structural measures that will inform the 10-year implementation strategy of the flood risk management plans and to ensure their policies can benefit communities directly. The Government also established the Shannon Flood Risk State Agency Coordination Working Group in 2016 to support existing plans in place to address flooding on the Shannon and to enhance the ongoing cooperation of all the agencies in the Shannon, which Deputy Cowen has referred to. The group has taken a number of significant decisions since its establishment, including targeted maintenance activities along a number of locations, trialling lowering of levels in Lough Allen and a study of the cause of degree and rate restriction downstream of Partine Weir. In October 2019, the group agreed to a €7 million strategic programme of maintenance and removal of constrictions or pinch points, as Deputy Cowen referred to, on the bed of the Shannon at the Callows region between Athlone and Meelick Weir. Progression of these works will be subject to full environmental impact assessments required and planning consent to proceed. The decision to undertake these projects was noted by the Government in December of 2019, and Waterways Ireland has advised that it has commenced work on advancing the various interventions for these, expected to commence in 2021. This investment, as well as helping to manage flooding, can support the tourism, navigation and agricultural sectors for the region, which Deputy Cowen referred to. In relation to the water levels, specifically on the Shannon, the ESB manages them, the weirs, sluices and other works that are part of the Shannon scheme, and the water levels on Lough Allen, Ree and Lough Derg. The levels in between these lakes are managed by Waterways Ireland for navigation purpose. Both organisations are members of the group that I referred to earlier and communicate on a daily basis to ensure a coordinated approach to managing the water levels on the river. And queries arising from the protocols of the managing of the water levels at any given time are directed both to ESB and Waterways Ireland. I'll conclude in a minute, Cahill. Thanks.
Thank you, Cahill, and thank the Minister for his response to details which have been given to me. And I want to concentrate specifically, in order to deal with this issue, on the fact that, yes, the Government did establish a Shannon Flood Risk State Agency Coordination Working Group in 2016, and its specific remit was to support existing plans in place to address flooding. The issues that arise that have been undertaken further to that include, as the Minister alluded to, the €7 million towards strategic programme of maintenance and removal of constrictions or pinch points on the bed of the River Shannon and Callows region between Athlone and Meelick Weir. And they are ongoing, and insofar as one would have hoped they have not had the desired impact or effect that we would have hoped and would have envisaged back then. So that's something that has to be addressed. In relation to enhance the agency's other duty was to enhance the ongoing cooperation of all state agencies involved with the River Shannon. But I have to say, if I am here raising this issue, which is the second year running, which is impacting on 200 at least farms, their livelihoods and their potential to provide a livelihood into the future, well then that coordinated approach is not working. The protocols that were referred to that would seem to direct us towards the ESB and Waterways Ireland in relation to levels and in relation to the maintenance and the maintenance and keeping of levels between Athlone and Meelick is not working. That protocol is not sufficient. If it were sufficient, we wouldn't have the flooding. If they were sufficient, we wouldn't have the diverse opinions in relation to the management of those weirs as relayed to me. So I would say that it is incumbent now on the government, it is incumbent on those with responsibility within government to again bring together that risk agency coordination working group to lay those questions at its table, to seek resolutions from those at that table whom have responsibilities in this regard and who had given commitments that such a coordination approach would meet with the desired impact, would meet with the desired resolution, would meet with the success and with the support of those agencies and most especially those who depend on these lands for a livelihood. That is not the case. As I said earlier, it has proven to have failed in its responsibility in that area, and as a result of that, I would implore upon the Minister to reconvene that group, to meet with the disaffected farmers and their representative associations that I alluded to in the short term, so as that he is properly armed and has at his disposal all the relevant information, not just the information provided by those at the table whom have failed to date, but by those who are severely impacted by their neglect and who have very little hope of survival if there isn't a resolution forthcoming as a result of such an information and meeting that I propose.
Thanks, Cahir. Look, and in his earlier intervention, Deputy Cowen asked me to do three things: to meet, to be upfront and straight, and to resolve. Well, I can commit to doing two of those things. I can commit, no problem, to meeting and to being upfront and straight, and I think he knows me long enough about that. The resolution issue, you know, this is the issue of flooding on the Shannon goes back, it predates the foundation of the state. It is a slow-moving river. We all know the issues associated with it. We all know where communities have interfaced with the Shannon, where man-made obstacles interface with the Shannon, where agricultural land interfaces with the Shannon. It comes through my own constituency, albeit in a different context, through the estuary. So it is a very complicated body of water from Cavan down to Kerry. But the Deputy is absolutely right. Over the last number of years, people have been inundated and they have had terrible devastation foisted upon them. And I have seen it over the last 9 weeks. I have seen 7 major flood events in this country over a 9-week period, and they're happening more frequently. And the reality as well is what we have to contend with, and the Deputy can support me in this, and other deputies as well, I would ask for the same thing, is that unfortunately, at the rate of which our climate is changing, maybe our regulatory and policy platform hasn't changed quite as rapidly as it should have to take into account the changing environmental considerations that we have. Because we know, and there's deputies in the House will agree with me, that the regulations, directives, legislation that we have that controls the manner in which we can deal with flood events does to many degrees frustrate the process in which we can respond to people. It might sound like book passing, but the reality is it's the legislation and it's the powers of the Houses of the Oireachtas that have been set out under several pieces of legislation. Deputy Cowen asked me if I would meet with the relevant parties. I have no problem in doing that. Farming organisations have already been in touch with me. It's my intention to go to Offaly, Galway, Westmeath and that part of the Shannon Basin as quickly as I can over the next couple of weeks. And I'd hope that he might be available to join me in it, because he's right, I do want to see it firsthand. But I think that we need to have a very honest, upfront and fairly clear discussion in this House, Chairman, and in the other House in relation to how our policy platform, our legislative platform and our regulatory platform is designed to cope with these kind of events which are becoming more frequent.